On the surface, Mary II of England seemed like the ultimate good girl of the 17th century. But nothing could be further from the truth. Known as the Traitor Queen, Mary's betrayal cut so deep it left many praying for her downfall. And the way she got her karma is the most shocking part of all. As the heir of two successive kings, Mary was raised and trained to be an exquisite but useless jewel of the English court. She got very lucky when she was born. Not only was her uncle Charles II the current King of England, but her own father James was next in line for the throne. This meant her childhood was full to the brim with feasts and everything a little princess could want. Yet, despite this luxury, there was a darkness at the heart of Mary's family. Her mother, Anne Hyde, knew she had to do her duty as a royal wife, and she gave birth to an incredible 8 children over the course of her marriage. Tragically, however, times were rough during the 17th century, and only Mary and her younger sister Anne survived childhood. Though Mary II grew up surrounded by death, she was about to receive the real blow of her young life. Before she was even 10 years old, she experienced every child's worst nightmare. Her poor mother, after decades of constant pregnancy, finally succumbed to breast cancer shortly after giving birth to yet another child, who did not survive infancy. This was sadly the fate for many women in that time period. And things only got worse for Mary from this point on. Although Mary's uncle Charles was the reigning king, he had no other heirs, which meant that all of his attention was on Mary. With no mother around to protect her, this was a very bad thing. Charles controlled almost every aspect of her life, forcing her and her sister Anne to become Anglican, even though their parents were both Catholic, and making them live entirely apart from their family just to make sure. Only 2 years after her mother's passing, Mary got the shock of her life. Her father James quickly remarried. He was still hoping there was time to pop out a male heir to supplant his daughters, and even though that was pretty normal for the time, it was no doubt a blow to their self-esteem. He chose the Catholic Maria of Modena as his new bride, a beautiful Italian aristocrat who was utterly devoted to him. But this turned out to be a pretty bad decision. For one, Mary's new stepmother was big trouble for the English court. The Anglican powers hated that Maria of Modena was Catholic, particularly since James was next in line for the throne. And this especially bothered our girl Mary, who had been fully indoctrinated by her isolated, lonely upbringing. Now, as a devout Anglican, she deeply disapproved of her father's second wife, not to mention the fact that she was only 4 years older than Mary, which added to her disdain for the whole situation. But by this point, she was already being pushed into a marriage of her own. Before she was even 15, the men in her family started looking for a potential suitor. After all, as a princess of England and a current heir to the throne, what else was she going to do with her life except get married and have babies? In the end, her family landed on a very strange choice: her cousin. Prince William of Orange was 11 years older than Mary and only interested in the power that the match would gain him. Of course, Mary herself wasn't too interested in him either. To her, he was just some random old Dutch guy. When her father James told his daughter that she was going to marry him, Mary burst almost immediately into tears, and she didn't stop. Reportedly, she wept all that afternoon and the following day. In fact, she cried all throughout her wedding ceremony too. When her aunt tried to comfort her by saying, "When I came to England, I had not even seen the king," Mary apparently snapped back, saying, "Madam, you came into England, but I am going out of England." So she would be leaving her whole life behind to marry this stranger. Mary's wedding day on November the 4th, 1677 was truly a dark one. After the nuptials came her public bedding ceremony. Yep, this is where a room full of people were supposed to lead the newlyweds to the marriage bed and then watch them consummate the union. And Mary's night was even more embarrassing than most. Practically her entire family attended the ceremony, and her uncle King Charles II even drew the bed curtains, encouraging Mary's new husband William to lay her down and get going. If you're thinking this sounds super embarrassing, you would be right, and it really makes you thankful this tradition hasn't lived on. Sadly, our poor Mary could never catch a break. Besides enduring a nightmare journey over to her new home in Holland, the English princess quickly discovered her pregnancy just months after marriage. Yes, she was barely out of childhood herself, and now she was carrying an actual child. Although she must have been terrified about her future, her husband William did not help matters. In fact, he practically abandoned her. She already spent so much of her life in near isolation, and moving halfway across Europe to Holland certainly did not improve her problems. Mary was alone there for most of the time too, since William was frequently away on military campaigns. It got so bad that even Mary's family, never the most affectionate, started thinking William was a cold fish. Eventually, she became so desperate to connect with him that while pregnant, she made the effort to visit him in the city of Breda. Little did she know, she was walking into an ordeal from which she would never recover. While in Breda, Mary realized that something was seriously wrong. She eventually lost her pregnancy, and this kicked off a period of intense illness over the next couple of years. Indeed, many historians believe that it was this moment that rendered her permanently infertile. Whatever the case, it was a brutal loss of innocence, and in hindsight, it explains why Mary suddenly turned on her own family and made the gut-wrenching decision that brought her the title of Traitor Queen. By the 1680s, both William and Mary were well aware that her uncle, King Charles II, was getting old, and that her father James was poised to become king. Let's just say they weren't too happy about this. After all, her father was still Catholic, while they were still the Protestant power couple. Now, Mary and James had never been particularly close as she grew up, and the cracks between father and daughter were starting to show in a big way, so there was already a lot of hatred brewing behind the scenes. Then in February of 1685, when Mary was just 23 years old, King Charles II finally passed away, making her father king and Mary officially the heir presumptive to the English throne. At the time, she was playing a game of cards when her husband came into the room and told her that she was this close to the crown. Nothing was ever the same again. From almost the moment her father became king, Mary transformed from daughter to rival. She hated practically everything her father did as monarch, and she could hardly believe that one of his first acts was to grant religious freedoms to some of his Catholic and other non-Anglican friends. She thought that this was downright illegal, and even wrote to the Archbishop of Canterbury to complain. Annoyed at his daughter's attempts to undermine him, James started to attack her marriage, and he wasn't subtle about it either. Soon enough, he was claiming that William was cheating on her with none other than one of her ladies-in-waiting, Elizabeth Villiers. And it's safe to say that Mary didn't handle this well. By this point, she had grown very fond of the husband she once despised. So she was completely enraged by her father's petty whispers. Nonetheless, she could not get them out of her head, and so she decided to see for herself. One evening, she posted up at Elizabeth Villiers' bedchamber at an ungodly late hour to see if she could catch William creeping out. Sadly, she didn't have to wait long to find out the truth. As Mary kept an eye on Elizabeth's door, she saw William slowly making his way out. Beside herself, she furiously confronted him about his cheating ways. Of course, the prince staunchly denied that there was any kind of affair going on between them, and Mary actually believed him. But even though she forgave, she definitely did not forget. Just in case there was any truth to the rumors, she fired her whole staff, including the offending lady-in-waiting, and sent them packing back to England. This is where the family feud really started to get ugly. From 1686 onward, Mary II watched in horror as her father grew more and more unpopular with her Anglican friends. Then everything came to an infamous head. In 1688, her stepmother Maria gave birth at last to a healthy male heir, James Francis, who would certainly be raised Catholic. The thought of a fully Catholic successor threw much of England into a tailspin, and now Mary herself was out for blood. People were so angry about the birth, they started saying that someone must have snuck the boy in through a warming pan to hide the fact that Maria really had another stillborn child. And you can guess who was a pretty big fan of this conspiracy, none other than our girl Mary, who was convinced that her baby brother was not really her brother, so she was doing everything she could to spread the rumor of his illegitimacy. Desperate for more information on the royal baby, she wrote to her sister Anne back in England to discover everything that she could about the circumstances of his birth. The reply back made her blood run cold. Anne also had doubts about the child's legitimacy, writing that she thought the pregnancy could have been a fake, saying, "Maybe it is our brother, but God only knows." With this, Mary needed no further proof that her father was trying to ruin her own claims to the English throne, all in order to secure a Catholic succession. This was really the breaking point for her. Still, no one could have predicted how far she would go for revenge. Just days after her baby brother's birth, Mary and William got a very indecent proposal. 7 high-ranking nobles in England sent a letter to the Dutch Republic actually begging them to come over to England and invade, overthrowing Mary's father. Now, a dutiful daughter would have said no, but of course, Mary was not that person anymore. Over the next months, she and William plotted one of the most notorious betrayals in the annals of English history, and it was Mary who convinced William to take up the call. And by November of 1688, she had completed her treachery. That month, William's forces landed in England and all too easily routed the English in what everyone soon called the Glorious Revolution. In another month, her father James fled to France with his tail between his legs, abandoning his kingdom and leaving his daughter with her bloody spoils. The deed was finally done, and as Mary soon discovered, it could not be undone. When she heard of her father's disgrace, you might think that she felt triumphant. After all, she had everything that she wanted now. But it was quite the opposite. Slowly but surely, the lingering guilt started creeping in. Guilt so strong and so destructive that it would eat her up until her dying days. To the outside world, Mary declared that she had only wanted to save church and state. But deep down, she knew that she had desecrated the commandment, "Honor thy father." So, as she traveled to England to collect her crown alongside William, she spoke of how her father's misfortunes dashed her secret joy. And as it happened, her father had one final knife to twist in her side. You see, while Mary and William were preparing for their coronation, James watched enviously and bitterly from France. Then he dealt his daughter a cruel blow. He wrote a nasty rant about how she was an ungrateful, disloyal daughter, and this completely tore her reputation to shreds. When Mary and William entered London for the first time after their glorious revolution, Mary was so distraught about her father that William had to order her to be cheerful. And her shame was only made worse when the Archbishop of Canterbury refused to perform the coronation because of the couple's invasion. Of course, she was still made queen, so by this point she had achieved everything that she ever wanted. So why did it all go so wrong? Well, it turned out that Mary had precious little time on the throne. In April of 1692, a devastating blow struck the queen. She caught a nasty fever, one that was so bad it left her bedridden. Mary seemed like she had almost recovered from that one when only 2 years later, she contracted the dreaded smallpox. Her reaction was swift and brutal. Taking the pragmatic perspective, she dismissed absolutely everyone who didn't have any immunity from her presence, hoping to contain the illness. She even had hoped to recover. After all, she was only 32 years old, and she had all the doctors that money could buy. Tragically, that is not at all what happened. Unfortunately for Mary, she had caught an extremely lethal case of smallpox, which is why she fell sicker than ever, and on December the 28th, 1694, she passed away, barely into her 30s. It was only after her death that her journals revealed a heartbreaking truth. She believed that the trials of the later part of her life was simply karma coming back to get her. According to Mary, it was divine punishment for her sin in participating in the glorious revolution and overthrowing her own father. So in the very end, she expressed regret for hurting her own family and for all the things she did to become the traitor queen. If you love this video and want to see more like it, be sure to like and subscribe. We'll catch you in the next one.